Hello again, YouTube! This is Dr. Kendo, and I'm back with another Scribblenauts Unlimited Object Editor Commentary episode right here. This is where I just create your favorite characters in the Scribblenauts Unlimited Object Editor. That's a feature that's on the Wii U and PC versions of this game, presuming you have a legal copy of it, that is. And so here we have our creation from 2 episodes ago, which was Bendy. And so we are actually going to be creating another Bendy and the Ink Machine character, which is going to be Boris the Wolf. So right here, we're going to start off with a HAZMAT worker as the source object. Usually I do this when I start with this character when I want kind of just a blank slate torso. I don't want to have any kind of like details from the torso, anything show up. I just want one solid color, which is going to be straight up black. But we are actually going to go over this torso with a wrestler torso. After that, the male wrestler, because it has kind of these, where the pecs are, the chest, that's kind of popping out a little bit more in the shape that I want from the HAZMAT worker. So you could be asking, Dr. Kendo, why not just start out with a wrestler then as the source object? Well, there's one thing is that source objects, you usually do that to save stamp space, which this would be kind of counterintuitive to that thought process. But the other kind of component to that is that the wrestler will do push-ups and stuff. If you kind of just have an object with the wrestler as the source idly walking around or whatever, it'll do push-ups and stuff like that. I don't want the Boris to be doing push-ups, so we did start out with the HAZMAT for that kind of behavior pattern. I used a nudibranch, and you can also pronounce that differently if you're in other parts of the world here, but in the United States it's often nudibranch. And we took the kind of bent back tentacle on the head of that nudibranch, and by tentacle I mean antenna. A baboon tail piece that is next to its body, so not the end tail piece, but the middle other part of the tail. That was for the neck of Boris, and so you want to make sure to attach that baboon piece to the actual torso so that it won't be moving with the head, it won't be moving with any other body parts, I guess. Popcorn we're going to use for the gloves right there, and so you can see it's kind of starting out with his hands and stuff and the gloves. It's interesting because you're going to see this kind of I might mention this several times maybe, but I need to get out right now that Boris, you can actually see the design for Boris in many different ways, and fans have also done a lot of fan art that is very different from each other. So, you don't often get 2 images of Boris that are having the same consistent design properties. I guess what I mean by that is one example is in the game Bendy and the Ink Machine, Boris is actually not wearing gloves. Boris is strapped to the table or whatever, to the rack. We'll talk about that later, but you can see that he doesn't have the white gloves on, but you can see then that there are posters in the game for Bendy and Boris and everything, or fan art that fans have done, or just various imagery of Boris that does have gloves. And then do the gloves have little black parts on them or not? And again, that's sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. But just to come back to the creation here, we got those nudibranch, the other antenna piece, it's a little bit more straight. It has a slight bend on the top of it. We did that for the white part on the top of the popcorn gloves there, so kind of where it meets the wrist. We also used that same stamp piece for the legs. We actually did it twice and painted them all the way black this time for the legs. So that's why Boris has these sort of thin legs right there. And I took a tooth fairy, the back arm of the female tooth fairy. That's the equivalent of going into the 29-page library in this game, Scribblenauts Unlimited. Unmasked doesn't have it, so if you are playing in Unmasked, you've got to type in the tooth fairy and grab the back arm. But basically there is an arm shape on the 29-page library that is so close, very, very similar to that shape. And so that's the start of the shoes, and then kind of where the heel is on Boris's shoe, we used that same baboon piece from the neck up above, that tail piece. And so then we're going to make the main part of the shoe, I would say, with the mango here in Scribblenauts. So just type in mango and that should work. It's all looking good. I had to move one of the legs out of the way so we could kind of see the back leg right there. This is going to be the stamp limit right here. You can see as I typed in Phoenix, we've got the little error on screen that says stamp limit reached. That is one facet of Scribblenauts Unlimited. The idea that basically everything you put on a creation is a stamp. And so we did run out of stamp space because the game, although called Unlimited, it does have a limited amount of stamp space. You can't just go with as many stamps as you want. So the Phoenix tail was the wolf tail, basically, for Boris the Wolf. And so right now we're doing some properties, and basically this is just where you can edit health and all sorts of other kinds of pieces of your character's scripting, perhaps, behaviors and stuff. So I like to read background information and fun facts about the characters that we create in this Scribblenauts series, so let's go ahead and talk about Boris the Wolf. So obviously Boris, as I mentioned before, is part of the story, character imagery, and more in the game, Bendy and the Ink Machine. He's been brought into the real world, like Bendy, but in playing Chapter 1, it's clear to see that he hasn't exactly had a great outcome in that whole thing. Minor spoilers, I suppose, although many of you watching this have already played or already viewed video of Chapter 1 and or don't mind knowing the following information, but basically Boris can be seen on a rack with his midsection just torn open and a message on the wall nearby that reads, "Who's laughing now?" It is a bit ambiguous, as it kind of implies that it was Bendy who wrote that, but the candles in the table rack that Boris is strapped to could also suggest that it might be part of Joey Drew's satanic ritual. Joey is the animator who created Bendy and Boris in the game's storyline, and unfortunately, as I've mentioned before, Boris is already dead by the time that Henry finds him. We're going to start off with the head as the source object right here. Paint the head all the way black if you're going by this design right here, and I've got an oil vent that I just typed in. That's the first time I think I'm using this stamp in this particular series, although I've used it just in my own dealings in this game. A cocoon. We got the cocoon to be basically the big first part of his snout right here. We can go with the same tooth fairy back arm, the female tooth fairy right there, and grab that back arm to be the bottom jaw. It's just going to go back behind the cocoon and be positioned, or I guess sized, I should say, about where it kind of fits halfway from the cocoon, so half the length. And then we typed in mango once again. We can make the mango be for kind of where the white is on his cheek, so kind of this muzzle snout area of Boris extended back behind the cocoon and all. A dot, we can make that for the cheek part right here. Some, again, artwork or posters do depict Boris with like a rosy cheek, but of course it being like black and white or sepia tone, you know, it's not actually like a red rosiness or anything, or it doesn't exactly have a color to it. So basically just for that cheek mark right there, we used a dot, and you can totally not include that if you want to go with a Boris design that doesn't have it. Like when he's strapped down and dead in the game, you don't see it, for just another example of how the artwork kind of differs for Boris. But here we've got the worm middle body piece, so there's kind of three main parts of the worm. You want to go with the one in the middle. That's the nose right there. I, of course, just painted that all black. And then we took hemisphere, and you're going to take 4 hemispheres total. If you're in Scribblenauts Unmasked, of course, you type in hemisphere, but in Unlimited, you do have the geometry library. It's basically just a collection of geometric shapes. So you grab it, it's a half sphere, and do 2 of them on each side for the eyes. And the last thing was the octopus tentacle pieces for these ears right there of Boris. And yet another kind of distinction for artwork is that sometimes you can see the ears depicted by fans as pointy, kind of like pointy wolf ears. But I'm going with this like, well, I mean, it's very close to the in-game Boris, the dead Boris. I'm mostly going by that design, but I would actually say more so probably, I don't know why I said the dead Boris. It's more like the poster of Boris, you know, kind of the posters showing off the old-timey Bendy and Boris shows and episodes and various imagery from the posters. So that's going to have these little, almost rounded at the top ears for Boris rather than pointy ears, kind of like how wolves or even like foxes and stuff, cats have in real life. Well, Boris is kind of old-timey image, that Steamboat Willie-looking Mickey Mouse cartoon style. You know, it's the ears look good like that. So since Scribblenauts Unlimited is limited in stamp space and we created the head and the body separately, you are going to need to make them go together. So to do that, here on your head object, you want to go into the properties editor and on the equipment tab, third circle down on that second half of the screen. So basically, second from the bottom circle, fill that in. It says can be worn on the face like glasses, and you'll see what happens when we put the head basically into the hands of the body object right there. Now that does not look right, am I right? So we basically are seeing that the head is way too low. It's almost like he's shrugging and doesn't have a neck or anything. So we're gonna go ahead and edit the Boris body object. And for that, we can now turn on the green grids. You basically hit this button. It has the dotted line with Maxwell's head and a wheel and bananas and all that. Top right button in your left side panel of objects. Well, that's going to turn on these green grids that show all the moving parts and all the parts where you can attach things for your object overall. So take the one where the head is going to be, obviously. That's that top green grid there where the head's position is. And we just move that grid pretty much, I would say, way up. You know, the head was pretty low when we just put it on earlier. So here you can see that it's a little bit more or I would say positioned correctly. That's as our Boris creation is standing next to Bendy right here. That looks good. And so I would say something that you guys like to see, of course, is seeing the creations that I make fight something. But before I do that, I did just want to point out, one of my viewers actually said it looks really awesome if you go into the time machine. You know, I kind of made a sepia-toned background and everything and did like custom colors and stuff and colored them sepia-toned, but if you do the time machine, you'll also get that fuzz and old-timey look to the screen right here. So pretty cool, right? But here's just another design for Boris that's very, very similar, but the kind of main difference is you can see that this Boris, it's currently on the left right now. They keep moving around, but that Boris that's on the left, I'm trying to move this one out of the way. The Boris on the left is one that we did not just create just now. It's one that I kind of created off camera, you could say. But the main difference is in the legs. If you really want those legs and those arms to be a lot thinner, you could do it like this. So if you want the body to be really disproportionately kind of bigger than the legs, which our creation today already kind of was to some degree, well, you can make them even thinner. So that's just what I wanted to show you. And we're going to have this kind of evil imp right here, basically to fight Boris after it was trying to run away and attack something else, but that's all right. And Boris is, you know, it's pretty self-explanatory. I didn't make him like super OP or anything like that, so he's actually gonna have a decent, I guess, battle here. It's mostly matched up, but it's not crazy important. Just wanted to show you the attack animation for that. It's gonna attack like a hazmat worker. So now that we're here at the end of the episode, one last thing that I did want to mention, or I might say two last things, I'm not sure, I'm just kind of spitballing at this point right here. I saw this when I created Wendy from Gravity Falls, and now that we've got Bendy, it's kind of obviously just one letter off. I noticed that people from other parts of the world, this happens so rarely, but I just wanted to address this point. I think it's important. Maybe a little less in intolerance, but we all come from different parts, even if you're in the United States like me, for instance, I come from the US, but especially if you're in the UK or if you're in Australia or something like that, we might pronounce things differently. And even within the United States, there are different pronunciations, you know, like I'm from Texas, for example. And so the comment that I rarely get, but it did happen last time on the Bendy creation, is that people are saying I'm saying Bendy, so like B-I-N rather than B-E-N. And so I just want to say, again, we are going to have slight pronunciation differences just because we come from different parts of the world, and saying Bendy is basically like Bendy to us, whereas Wendy and Wendy are virtually the same. It's like tomato, tomato. You pronounce it one way, I pronounce it this way. It's all good. Neither of us is wrong. Neither of us is right, but we're both right. And then the last thing was some people commented on the Bendy creation and said that I forgot the tail on Bendy, and that was not true. First of all, we did run out of stamp space, but the other thing is that when you see Bendy, you actually see most of the imagery, and especially like the little cutout of Bendy in the game that keeps showing up, it does not show the tail on it. I mean, I'm not taking crazy pills, so I'll show imagery on screen, but I always show a comparison image, so you guys can always check. If you're like, he forgot something, check the comparison images here at the end. I always create these accurately with as much detail that I can get within the confines of Scribblenauts Unlimited. While this is a game that does have a stamp limit and sometimes that inhibits us from going further, I didn't forget a demon tail or anything like that on Bendy. Bendy can have a devil tail. That's something that can be shown, but just a crap ton, like most of the time that you see Bendy, there's no tail visible. Anyway, with that, I would just like to say, my subscribers, I don't know, I mean, I would say I don't thank you enough, but I think I actually kind of do. I thank you every time that I comment back because I reply to basically everybody's comments that aren't a request. Most popular, most requested creations get made each week, by the way. That's how the system works. But, you know, I say thanks for viewing at the end of basically every comment that I write, or I say thanks. I always end every episode off saying thanks for viewing, but really just kind of to take another moment. I think that you guys are wonderful. You know, I just have had such a stream of amazing comments, incredible compliments. I feel that the channel has actually grown a lot back in, like, for instance, last month, February. It was really great. And I just have to say that I really appreciate you guys. I really appreciate those incredible comments. You guys just keep coming back saying really nice things, and it is the best. You guys rock so much. And so, with that, I'll sign out saying what I always say. I'll catch you on the next vid, and thanks for viewing.
Down the road of twists